Harley culture is weird, right? We can say that, we can all agree. And look, as a diehard sport bike guy, I'm not sure if I really get it. I've been interested in the go fast stuff ever since I got into motorcycling many years ago, but today I wanted to take an objective, honest, and a little personal look at Harley Davidson and see if the bar and shield is something that I'll ever understand. Let's get into it. So let's start with some personal anecdotes. What were my earliest memories of Harley Davidson as a diehard motorcyclist? Well, I actually have many of them. One of my best friends who lived on the same street as me growing up in Orlando had a Harley, and I think he also had a Goldwing if memory serves me correctly, but he was a big touring Harley guy. And I remember seeing those down my street and thinking, wow, those are pretty interesting. Like everyone else who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, I definitely saw Arnold on the back of I believe it was a Fat Boy or a Fat Bob. I don't know. He rode that bike in the Terminator movies. I remember thinking that was super cool. My second cousin's boyfriend actually had a Sportster that I rode on the back of when I was a kid. He just took me around the block and I just loved the way the motor felt and the torque of the engine. I was really little. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old at the time, but I remember being super cool. And while this may not be a Harley necessarily, I remember one time I was parked at a Blockbuster with my dad and he parked right there. This must have been the late 90s. And I saw a guy parked right next to me on a black Honda Shadow. I remember seeing the Shadow logo on the side of the bike and just thinking he looked super cool. So I got exposed to Harley from way back in the day, and through all that cultural permeation, it never really stuck with me. Why is that? You would think through all those early core memories, I would be a Harley guy at this point, right? I certainly have more memories of Harleys when I was a kid than sport bikes. And truthfully, I think it was the kind of people that were riding them. So a little bit of background on me. I'm a Brazilian immigrant. My whole family is from Brazil. I moved to the United States when I was just 2 years old, and so I grew up as a first-generation immigrant. My family only spoke Portuguese at home. And I never received any sort of racism or anything that I could quantify as that when I was a kid, but I definitely felt othered as a kid when kids would find out that I spoke a different language or I ate a food that was a little different than theirs. Even though, let's be real, who doesn't like rice, beans, and chicken? I think that's universal. Honestly, Harleys just didn't seem like something that I was supposed to own as an immigrant. Like they weren't made for people like me. They were for real Americans, or what I thought were real Americans at the time. These kind of big-boned guys who'd go to bars all the time, live the biker lifestyle, and had a totally different relationship to what it meant to be American than what it meant to me. Harleys have a uniquely American allure, don't they? They're a cultural export. I mean, people in other countries literally buy them to feel more American. I've seen plenty of French guys riding around big bagger Harleys in the south of France, which is weird. There's the freedom of the open road and the brotherhood and all that stuff. They received Reagan-era protectionism. They're 33% of every motorcycle sold in the United States. 1/3 of new bike sales in the United States is a Harley Davidson. But no one in my direct family had one. No one I knew had one. No one introduced me to motorcycling. My dad rode a little bit when he was younger, but by the time I was old enough to think for myself, he had been long gone past being a motorcyclist. And that's something that I find missing in my life is with Harley people, someone passed down the Harley torch directly to them usually. So before I could even really articulate my personal preference for performance, agility, speed, and those sort of things in a motorcycle, I already didn't really feel like a Harley was something I could even own. What's interesting is that all of these years later with my more adult eyes, none of these cultural reasons or any of the reasons why I wouldn't own a Harley Davidson, to be perfectly honest. I've met loads of diverse people riding Harley Davidsons. You got dorks on bikes, washed up old farts, and everything in between. My background certainly doesn't preclude me from owning a Harley Davidson now, and I'm sure if I bought one and showed up to a bike night, no one would bat an eye. Except maybe if they recognized me from the Yami Noob channel and they'd say, why the hell are you on a Harley Davidson? When it comes down to me for Harley, from the perspective of a sport bike guy, is 3 main points. It's poor value for money, they're not as capable as other motorcycles, and they have a heritage that I just personally don't align with. Before I go further, let me know what you think about Harleys. Are you an American rider that doesn't drive with them? Are they something that's been passed down through your family in time immemorial and you feel like you have to ride one? Or are you just a diehard bar and shield guy? I'd love to know. So let's talk about the Harleys that I have ridden, and there's several. In total, I've ridden 9 different Harley Davidson motorcycles. I've actually owned 2 of them as giveaway bikes, if you can believe it. I've ridden a Dyna, China, an 883, a Street Rod 750, a V-Rod Custom, a Fat Bob, a Livewire 1, a Pan America, a 1200, and a 1275 Sportster that's Spite modified to be a monster. There's no denying that Harleys are singularly unique in motorcycling. In my opinion, because they haven't advanced enough in the last 20 or 30 years, they've developed this kind of retro charm around them, not too dissimilar from Royal Enfield. And by the way, if you're wondering, the Sportster is my favorite Harley Davidson. There's just something about them. They're so sweet. And there's also the limitless potential of Harley Davidson as a company that can just make a Pan America when it chooses to, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Harley is a really interesting company that could have been so much more than the company that just makes 900-pound air and oil-cooled baggers. But ultimately, the uniquely American thing about Harley Davidson is that they chose to stop innovating in the 80s. Maybe earlier than that too. Instead of directly competing with Japanese and European manufacturers, Harley Davidson cried to the government and wanted protectionism, which, now that I think about it, might be the most uniquely American thing about Harley Davidson. Why compete when you can cheat, right? If you have a monopoly on a market, keep it at all costs. Like, can you imagine a world in which Harley Davidson kept trying to compete with European and Japanese manufacturers and actually made bikes that were just as good as them? We could maybe even have Harley in MotoGP, for God's sake. I think Eric Buell was the closest we ever got to that. And that was a far cry.
Did someone say giveaway bike? Yes, I do have one of those. GSX 8R from Suzuki is up for grabs on Yamanoo.co. This thing is super torquey and fun. It's way better than I thought it would be. It's so fun to get through the gearbox. Between like 2,000 and 5,000 RPM, it's seriously punchy. Members on the website get automatic entries based on their tier level along with exclusive content. But you can also get entries by purchasing merch, and we've actually just launched 3 new designs for your viewing pleasure. We've got this 90s NASCAR tee, which is pretty sweet. It's got this beautiful Busa on there with all the 90s nostalgia you could want. We've also got the stretch Gixxer tee because I hate to break it to you boys, size does matter. So let everyone know you've got going on down low with the Gixxer tee. And lastly, we've got this Death by Boost metal tee because you know there's nothing more nihilistic than spending tens of thousands of dollars to turbocharge a bike knowing perfectly well it will explode at a moment's notice. Yeah, you might have seen my Turbo Busa's head on the Bearded Mechanic channel. Not good. So head over to Yamanoo.co to check all of those out. They come in 4 different colors, and I think they're pretty darn sweet. While you're over there, sign up for our newsletter to get all the raunchy motorcycle content beamed into your inbox, and consider becoming a member for Discord access and even more perks. Thanks so much for being a part of this community. I am immensely grateful for your viewership. Now let's get back to the show.
As a side note, one of my favorite things that Harley Davidson guys tell me is that I need to ride the right Harley. You never hear this from Yamaha, Ducati, or any other kind of fandom, but for some reason, if I ride a Harley, they tell me I need to ride the right Harley. Like, you'd never see a video with a guy riding MT-07 in the comments saying, you need to ride the right Yamaha. I just think it's funny. But again, with stuff like the Sportster, the V-Rod, there's actually been several Harleys that I really gelled with and I thought were really cool. But there's no getting around the fact that they are just poor value for money. Harleys are notorious for being not so cutting edge. They trade on nostalgia, made in America, and the big air and oil-cooled V-twin thing. When you compare a like-for-like motorcycle with any other brand, the HD just doesn't really add up. For example, the 2024 Road King Special, the cheapest Grand America touring bike on their website. Its MSRP is $24,999. You get a big air and oil-cooled twin that's 1,868 cc's. It makes 95 horsepower and 122 foot-pounds of torque. And from what I could gather looking at pictures and the specs, this thing is absolutely bare bones. There's no tech, everything is an optional extra, and I don't know, it looks kind of lacking when you consider that a 2024 Goldwing has its number in pretty much every category. The Goldwing is $299 cheaper at $24,700 MSRP. It has an 1833 liquid-cooled flat 6, so you're getting 4 extra cylinders with 125 ponies and 125 foot-pounds of torque. Bog standard, it's loaded to the gills with tech, and in my opinion, it's the pinnacle of touring. Only recently has Harley been able to compete with value for money with something like the Pan America, which I think is a miracle they were able to price it the way that they were. It competes right there with the new BMW R1300 GS, and I actually think it is good value for money and competes in the category. But when you look at basically every other motorcycle in their lineup, it's not really good in terms of value for money. It brings me to point 2. They're just not as capable as normal motorcycles. They're extremely heavy, have very limited ground clearance, and that's not even to mention the limited horsepower on tap. You do get a lot of torque though, but again, you're gonna need it because these things weigh like 800 to 900 pounds. They're lumbering, unwieldy to ride, and overall can be a bit of a hassle. They do pretty darn well slabbing it up straight in a line, just going down the highway, but there's plenty of bikes that can do that. Any new sport touring bike is gonna crush that task. I mean, think about the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT. That'll happily crush miles going straight, and it's a whole lot more exciting to ride. And it's cheaper and lighter. The king of the baggers category even proves that with proper factory race support. Look, these bikes were never designed to be raced, and so when you look at the king of the baggers bike, they are wildly far and away from what the street motorcycle is. But with Kyle Wyman aboard the factory HD king of the bagger bike, he did a 128.58 around Laguna Seca, which in truth is ridiculously impressive. However, consider that Gus Rodeo, a Twins Cup rider aboard an Aprilia RS660, posted up a 129.26, meaning that you have somewhat limited potential with the huge bagger bike. But that's through the lens of sporting performance, and nobody buys a Harley because of its sporting performance. They buy it despite the fact that it can't really corner. And all that to say is that none of what I just said matters because there's an indescribable allure to these motorcycles. As I said earlier, Harleys have cultural cachet, man. They have bar and shield, they have the branding. It's the most successful t-shirt company that also sells motorcycles by happenstance. It's not that much different than Ducatistas who love the sound of a mechanical dry clutch and a single-sided swing arm and the desmodromic valves. Is it faster than an R1? Not really. Is it more expensive? Yeah, a whole lot more, but they don't care because there's an emotional allure to them. I remember when Spite put together the 1275 Sportster project back in 2020 on the Yami Noob channel, and I got to ride that thing, and it honestly blew me away at how rowdy and interesting and unique it was. And as a guy who really prides himself on unique and interesting motorcycling experience, a hopped up Sportster was one of the coolest that I've had, and I actually found myself really enjoying it. It's why, even though I will likely never buy a Harley Davidson for myself, I have massive respect for those who do. Because I like to think that I do get it, even if it's not for me personally. And the camaraderie and shared experience of people who buy Harley Davidsons and meet up at clubs and go on big rides, that cannot be overstated. You have stuff like Sturgis and the big rallies. I think it's really cool that people get together, encourage more people to get on two wheels, and from what I've seen, are mostly positive. Of course you have bad eggs and crazy biker gangs and all kinds of stuff, but on the whole, let's be real, most Harley Davidson people are just like you and me, they're just motorcyclists. And even though anything a Harley does, a motorcycle can do better, I'll happily chuck a biker wave to any Harley I see coming on the way on the highway. And if Tail of the Dragon footage has taught me anything, it's that some Harley riders can really get it too. But remember, don't drag that rear brake too much because you're gonna fishtail and lose control. So guys, that's my analysis of Harley Davidson as a dyed-in-the-wool sport bike guy and a guy who probably won't ever own one. I have massive respect for these bikes. I think they're really interesting, and I'd like to see Harley Davidson do a little bit better in our current market because they are the home team, and I think it would be pretty sweet if we get some newer modern bikes and more competitive pricing. How about a Harley Davidson beginner bike? Maybe we'll get the Bronx. We won't get the Bronx. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later. Keep watching Yami Noob.